My brother told my parents I had walked away from medical school, and that single lie erased me from the family for 10 years. They didn't come to my residency graduation, and they missed my wedding. Last month, my brother ended up in the ER, with my parents and my Uncle Matthew by his side. When the attending physician entered, my mother grabbed my father's arm so hard it bruised. Her voice shook as she said, "Tell me that's not him." My father stammered, "But we were told he dropped out." Uncle Matthew looked between us and said, "So that was all a lie?" Before I tell you about the absolute collapse of their 10-year illusion, and the exact moment their egos shattered on the sterilized floor of my hospital, please leave a comment below and tell me where you are watching from. I really want to know how far this story reaches. Let me set the scene for you. It was a Tuesday night in Washington, D.C. The emergency room was a chaotic symphony of alarms, rolling stretchers, and shouting medics. I was the attending physician on shift. I had the clipboard in my hand, a stethoscope around my neck, and the heavy authority of a man who makes life or death decisions every single day. I walked into Trauma Bay 2, pushing the heavy glass doors open, fully prepared to save a stranger. Instead, I saw Caleb, my older brother. He was strapped to a backboard, his face covered in abrasions, his chest rising and falling in shallow, erratic gasps. The monitors were screaming, but what made the air leave my lungs wasn't the sight of his broken body. It was the 3 people standing just outside the glass partition. My mother, Eleanor, my father, Robert, and my Uncle Matthew. I had not seen my parents in exactly 3,650 days. The last time I heard my father's voice, he was screaming through the phone, calling me a failure, a liar, and a disgrace. He had blocked my number right after. My mother had returned my letters unopened. They had completely written me off, choosing to believe Caleb's fabricated reality over my proven truth. And now, here they were, standing in my territory. My mother saw me first. Her eyes widened, scanning my face, then dropping to the embroidered letters on my white coat. Dr. Nathan Brennan, Chief Attending. She grabbed my father's arm. I could see the panic, the sheer, unadulterated shock rippling through her posture. My father looked like a man who had just been told the earth was flat. He stepped forward, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He looked at Caleb on the bed, then back at me, his brain completely short-circuiting as it tried to reconcile the failure he had thrown away with the authoritative doctor standing in front of him. He raised his hand, pointing a trembling finger at the glass. He wanted to speak. He wanted to demand answers. He wanted to assert the control he always had over me. I didn't even blink. I looked him dead in the eye, raised my hand, and firmly pulled the privacy blinds shut right in his face. I cut him off completely. My patient was crashing, and I had work to do. But before I tell you exactly what happened when I finally walked out of those doors to face them, I have to take you back. I have to show you the day my existence was officially erased, because you cannot understand the absolute justice of this moment without knowing the hell I had to walk through to get here. To understand how a family can completely abandon a son over a single phone call, you have to understand the unwritten rules of the house I grew up in. We lived in Durham, North Carolina. To the outside world, we were a perfectly normal, middle-class family. But inside those walls, there was a strict hierarchy, and Caleb sat right at the top on a golden throne. Caleb was 4 years older than me, and he was the golden child. He possessed this effortless, charismatic charm that could disarm anyone in a matter of seconds. He wasn't particularly smart, and he definitely wasn't a hard worker, but he knew how to talk. He knew how to manipulate a room. He knew exactly what my parents wanted to hear. My father, Robert, was a proud, stubborn man who valued appearances above absolutely everything else. He needed to be envied by the neighbors. My mother, Eleanor, was an enabler. She bent over backwards to keep the peace, which usually meant giving Caleb whatever he demanded. And then there was me, Nathan. I was the quiet one. I was the kid who stayed in his room reading, the one who brought home straight A's and handed over report cards that barely got a passing glance. I learned very early on that the best way to survive in that house was to be invisible. Every achievement I earned was immediately overshadowed by whatever Caleb was doing. If I won a science fair, Caleb had just scored a goal in a rec league soccer game, and guess which event got celebrated at dinner? I didn't hate my brother for it, not at first. I just accepted it as the law of gravity in our home. I thought if I just kept my head down, worked hard, and built my own future, my parents would eventually notice me. I thought my results would eventually speak loud enough to drown out Caleb's constant bragging. The dynamic violently shifted the spring I received my acceptance letter to a prestigious medical school in Richmond. I remember the afternoon clearly. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen. The word congratulations seemed to blur. I had done it. Years of grinding, studying late into the night, sacrificing weekends. It had all paid off. When I told my parents, the reaction was something I had never experienced before. For the very first time in my entire life, the spotlight shifted. My father actually clapped me on the back. His chest puffed out as he realized he could now tell his golf buddies his son was going to be a doctor. My mother started crying happy tears, immediately picking up the phone to call her sisters. For 1 week, I was the center of attention. I was the pride of the family, and Caleb absolutely hated it. I watched his jaw tighten every time my father mentioned my future salary or the prestige of my school. I saw the cold, dead look in his eyes when relatives congratulated me instead of asking him about his dead-end sales job. He smiled his plastic smile, but the jealousy was radiating off him like heat from a pavement. He couldn't stand that I had achieved something he could never talk his way into. I had stepped out of my designated role as the invisible background character, and in his mind, I had stolen his audience. He didn't say anything to me directly. He didn't pick a fight. He just sat back, watched, and waited for a moment of weakness. He waited for a crack in my armor so he could tear it all down and reclaim his throne. And unfortunately for me, that crack appeared during my second year of medical school. Medical school was a brutal, exhausting marathon, but I was handling it. I was in the top tier of my class, fueled by the sheer determination to prove I belonged there. Then, right in the middle of my second year, my Uncle Matthew got sick. Uncle Matthew was my mother's older brother, and he was the only person in my family who had ever truly seen me. He was a retired contractor, a pragmatic, no-nonsense guy who never fell for Caleb's cheap charm. When I was a kid, Matthew was the one who asked me about my books. He was the one who slipped me $20 for getting on the honor roll. He was the only adult who treated me like a human being instead of an accessory to my brother. He was diagnosed with an aggressive autoimmune condition. It hit him fast and it hit him hard. He lived alone, a few hours away from my parents in Durham. When the hospital admissions started piling up, I assumed my parents would step in. I assumed my mother would take care of her own brother. I was wrong. My father complained about the driving distance. My mother said she couldn't possibly handle the stress of seeing him in a hospital bed. They made a few phone calls, sent a few generic get-well-soon cards, and effectively abandoned him. I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave the one man who had ever supported me to navigate the terrifying maze of the healthcare system alone. So I made a choice. I went to the Dean of Student Affairs at my medical school. I laid out the situation clearly and asked for a formal, temporary leave of absence to act as my uncle's primary caregiver. Because my grades were excellent and my record was spotless, the board approved it immediately. I had a signed, stamped letter guaranteeing my spot in the program when I returned the following year. I wasn't dropping out. I was hitting pause for a family emergency. I packed my apartment, drove to Uncle Matthew's town, and moved into his spare bedroom. The next few months were a nightmare of bureaucracy. I wasn't just managing his physical pain. I was fighting the insurance companies. I remember sitting in the billing department of the local hospital, staring down a woman named Chloe. She was the head of patient accounts, a cold, bureaucratic wall of a person who refused to process a critical referral because of a missing signature. I argued with her for 2 hours, using every ounce of my medical knowledge to explain why the delay could cause permanent organ damage to my uncle. I won that fight, but it completely drained me. The physical toll of lifting Matthew, cooking, cleaning, and the mental toll of fighting the medical system left me exhausted. I was running on fumes, eating terrible food, and barely sleeping. One evening, my cousin Dylan called. Dylan was my aunt's kid, someone I had always considered a decent guy. He asked how I was holding up. I made the biggest mistake of my life. I let my guard down. I told him I was exhausted. I told him I missed the clean logic of my medical textbooks compared to the messy reality of insurance claims. I vented. I said, "Man, sometimes I wonder if I can handle the pressure of being a doctor if just dealing with the paperwork makes me want to pull my hair out. I'm just so burned out right now." It was a normal, human moment of vulnerability. I needed a friend to listen. Dylan offered a few sympathetic words, told me to hang in there, and hung up. I didn't know it at the time, but Dylan wasn't calling to check on me. He was fishing for information. And the second we disconnected, he called Caleb. He handed my brother the exact weapon he needed to destroy me. The phone rang at 2 a.m. I was asleep in a chair next to Uncle Matthew's bed, holding a half-empty cup of cold coffee. I jolted awake, my heart hammering in my chest. I scrambled for my phone in the dark, terrified that it was the hospital calling with bad lab results. I looked at the screen. It was my father. I answered, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't wake my uncle. "Dad, is everything okay? It's the middle of the night. Don't you dare play innocent with me, you ungrateful little liar." His voice boomed through the speaker. He wasn't just angry. He was enraged. The kind of toxic, explosive fury he usually reserved for telemarketers or bad customer service, but now it was directed squarely at me. I stood up, walking out into the hallway, completely confused. "What are you talking about? Caleb told us everything," my father sneered. "He told us about your little breakdown. He told us you couldn't handle the pressure, that you flunked out, and now you're hiding out at Matthew's house pretending to be a saint to cover up the fact that you threw your life away." I stopped dead in my tracks. The hallway felt suddenly freezing. "What, Dad? No. That is a complete lie. I am on an approved, documented leave of absence. I have the paperwork from the dean." "Shut up," he roared. "Dylan told Caleb exactly what you said. You're burnt out. You can't handle it. You know, I actually bragged about you, Nathan. I told my friends my son was going to be a doctor. And you humiliated me. You couldn't just stick it out. You had to have a mental collapse and run away." My mind raced. Dylan, that snake. He took my moment of exhaustion, twisted it, and handed it to Caleb. And Caleb had spun it into a masterpiece of character assassination. He didn't just tell my parents I was tired. He told them I was weak. He told them I had failed, that the school had kicked me out, and that I was too ashamed to face them. He played perfectly into my father's worst fear, public embarrassment. "Dad, listen to me," I pleaded, my voice shaking with a desperate need to be heard. "Caleb is lying to you because he's jealous. Let me send you the emails. Let me show you the official letter from the university. I am going back next year. I am just helping Uncle Matthew because neither of you would." That was the wrong thing to say. Pointing out their neglect of Matthew struck a nerve of guilt, and my father reacted with pure venom. "Don't you bring Matthew into this. You are a coward, Nathan. Caleb was right. He said you would try to blame us, that you would try to manipulate the situation. He told us you were unstable. We are done. Do you hear me? I am not paying another dime for your rent. I am not touching that college fund. Nothing. You are on your own. Dad, you have embarrassed this family for the last time." The line went dead. The silence in the hallway was deafening. I stood there staring at my phone, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. I felt physically sick. The betrayal hit me in waves. Caleb had orchestrated this. He had taken my sacrifice, putting my life on hold to care for a dying relative, and weaponized it to eliminate me from the family entirely. But what hurt the most, what truly broke something inside of me that night, wasn't Caleb's cruelty. It was how easily my parents believed it. They didn't ask me first. They didn't ask for proof. They jumped at the chance to believe the worst about me because it was easier than dealing with the truth. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. As the sun came up, the initial shock morphed into a cold, hard panic. I had to fix this. I was naive enough to believe that logic and evidence could defeat a lie. I thought if I just showed them the physical proof, they would realize Caleb had manipulated them, and they would apologize. I went to the local library that morning. I logged into my university portal and printed everything. My official transcripts showing a 3.9 GPA. The signed approval letter from the Dean of Student Affairs granting my temporary leave. The email chain confirming my good standing. I printed out 20 pages of undeniable government-certified proof that I was exactly who I said I was. I drafted a calm, respectful email to both my mother and my father, attaching digital copies of the documents. I hit send. 2 hours later, I received an automated reply, message undeliverable. The recipient has blocked your email address. I stared at the screen. They had blocked my email. I pulled out my phone and dialed my mother's number. It rang once and went straight to voicemail. Blocked. I tried my father. Blocked. Panic started to turn into a slow-burning anger. I went to the post office, bought a large priority mail envelope, and shoved the printed documents inside. I wrote a handwritten letter. I begged them to just look at the papers. I begged them to call the school administration themselves. I paid extra for certified mail with tracking, ensuring they had to acknowledge receiving it. Uncle Matthew tried to help. Despite his pain, he picked up his phone and called my mother. I sat next to him and listened to his side of the conversation. "Eleanor, you need to listen to me," Matthew said, his voice raspy. "Nathan is here taking care of me. He is a good kid. He didn't drop out. I have seen the paperwork with my own eyes. Caleb is lying to you." I heard my mother's voice on the other end, shrill and defensive. She didn't let Matthew finish. She accused him of covering for my mental breakdown and told him not to call again until he was willing to tell the truth. She hung up on her own sick brother. Matthew looked at me, a deep sadness in his tired eyes. "I'm sorry, Nate. They don't want to know." For days later, I went to the mailbox. Inside was the large priority envelope I had sent to Durham. It hadn't been opened. Scrawled across the front in thick, black Sharpie, in my mother's unmistakable handwriting, were 3 words: "Return to sender." I stood on the sidewalk holding that envelope, feeling the cool autumn wind hit my face. That was the exact moment the hopeful, desperate son inside me died. They didn't want the truth. The truth was complicated. The truth required them to admit they had raised a manipulative sociopath in Caleb, and that they had been terrible parents to me. Caleb's lie was easy. It fit perfectly into the narrative they had already built. Caleb was the success and Nathan was the failure. By accepting Caleb's lie, they absolved themselves of any guilt. I walked back into the house, threw the envelope into the trash can, and made a decision. I was never going to beg for their love again. I was never going to try to prove my worth to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. Uncle Matthew stabilized a few months later, enough for a home nurse to take over. I packed my bags, hugged him goodbye, and drove back to Richmond. I had zero financial support. I had no safety net. I had no family to go home to on Thanksgiving or Christmas. I only had my own 2 hands and a burning, undeniable rage. I took all that pain, all that betrayal, and I forged it into a weapon. I was going to become the best doctor my medical school had ever seen, not to prove them wrong, but to prove to myself that I never needed them in the first place. Returning to medical school in Richmond felt like walking into a wind tunnel. I had lost my entire family in the span of a few months, and I had absolutely no time to grieve. The curriculum was ruthless. Without my parents' financial backing, I had to take out massive student loans and pick up shifts as a phlebotomist at a local clinic just to keep the lights on and pay for groceries. My life became a blur of flashcards, stale coffee, and the smell of antiseptic. I didn't socialize. I didn't go to parties. Every ounce of my energy was channeled into survival and academic dominance. The rage I felt over Caleb's lie and my parents' betrayal became a cold, focused engine inside my chest. When I was too tired to study, I would picture my mother's handwriting, return to sender, and I would open the textbook again. I wasn't entirely alone, though. I met Gabriel during a grueling anatomy lab. Gabriel was a loud, brilliant guy from Chicago who noticed I was basically living in the library. He started bringing me extra sandwiches and forcing me to take 10-minute breaks. He didn't ask probing questions about my family, but he understood the look of a guy who had nothing to fall back on. Gabriel became my anchor during those years. By the end of my 4th year, I wasn't just surviving, I was dominating. I matched into one of the most competitive emergency medicine residency programs in the country, located right in Washington, D.C. I had the highest board scores in my cohort. Graduation day was a bizarre experience. The auditorium was packed with screaming families holding balloons, taking hundreds of photos, and crying tears of joy. I sat in my gown, listening to the speeches, feeling a strange mixture of immense pride and hollow silence. When they called my name, Dr. Nathan Brennan, Gabriel cheered so loudly he nearly lost his voice. Uncle Matthew couldn't make the trip due to his health, but he sent a heartfelt text. I looked up at the vast sea of faces in the stands. I saw fathers hugging their sons. I saw mothers wiping away tears. There were 3 empty seats in my mind where my family should have been. Caleb had successfully stolen this moment from me. He had convinced them I was a failure, while I was walking across a stage accepting a medical degree with honors. I didn't cry. I just gripped my diploma, walked off the stage, and went to work the very next morning. The past was dead. My future was waiting in the emergency room. Residency in an inner-city DC trauma center strips away every illusion you have about yourself. You learn very quickly who breaks under pressure and who turns into steel. My attending physician, Dr. Carter, was a legend in the hospital. He was a towering, intimidating man who tolerated exactly 0 excuses. He was known for eating interns alive if they hesitated during a code. He didn't care about your background, your charm, or how well you could talk your way out of a mistake. In the ER, the only currency that mattered was competence. For the first time in my life, I was in an environment where Caleb's manipulative tactics would have been utterly useless. You can't sweet-talk a massive hemorrhage. You can't lie your way out of a collapsing airway. Dr. Carter noticed my relentless focus. He pushed me harder than anyone else, throwing me into the most complex, high-stakes traumas that rolled through the ambulance bay. I thrived in the chaos. The adrenaline silenced the ghosts of my family. There was one specific night that cemented my reputation. A multi-vehicle pileup on the interstate brought in a flood of critical patients. I was a 2nd-year resident. Dr. Carter was busy opening the chest of a man in Trauma 1, and I was handling Trauma 3. A young woman was wheeled in, crushing chest pain, crashing blood pressure. The monitors were screaming a lethal rhythm. It wasn't a standard heart attack. Something was deeply wrong. The other residents were freezing, suggesting standard protocols that I knew would kill her faster. I trusted my gut, read the subtle signs on the ultrasound, and correctly diagnosed a cardiac tamponade, fluid crushing her heart. I didn't wait for permission. I grabbed a massive needle, guided it blindly under her sternum, and drained the blood sac around her heart. Her blood pressure shot up. The monitor stabilized. I had saved her life with seconds to spare. Dr. Carter walked in just as I was taping the needle down. He looked at the monitor, looked at the blood in the syringe, and then looked at me. He didn't smile, but he gave me a sharp nod. "Good catch, Brennan. That's how it's done." That nod meant more to me than any praise my father had ever given Caleb. 6 months later, I was offered a massive promotion to chief resident. I had built a fortress of professional respect, and nobody from Durham could touch me here. It wasn't just my career that blossomed in the ashes of my past. I met Sarah during my 3rd year of residency. She was a pediatric oncology nurse, which means she possessed a level of empathy and resilience that I was completely in awe of. We met over a terrible cup of break room coffee at 3 a.m. She saw past my hardened, stoic exterior almost immediately. She didn't pry, but slowly, over late-night dinners and exhausted weekend walks, I told her everything. I told her about Caleb, the golden child. I told her about the lies, the betrayal, and the envelope returned in the mail. Sarah didn't pity me, and she didn't tell me to forgive and forget. She simply held my hand and said, "They lost a brilliant man, and I get to keep him. Their loss." We got married a year after I finished my residency. It was a small, intimate ceremony in a botanical garden. Gabriel was my best man. Dr. Carter was sitting in the front row. And sitting right next to him, wearing an ill-fitting, outdated suit but beaming with pride, was Uncle Matthew. When Matthew hugged me at the reception, he held on tight. "You did it, Nate. You built a beautiful life." We sat down with a drink later, and Matthew let a piece of information slip. He told me that things in Durham weren't going great for Caleb. Caleb's charm had apparently worn thin in the corporate world, and he was currently facing a messy divorce and rumors of a custody battle. But despite his own life falling apart, Caleb was still actively keeping the lie about me alive. "He tells your parents you're working a minimum wage job in a warehouse somewhere," Matthew said, shaking his head. "And your dad just eats it up. It makes Robert feel better about bailing Caleb out of debt if he thinks you're doing worse." I just smiled and looked across the room at my beautiful wife, my loyal friends, and my mentor. "Let him talk, Uncle Matt. I don't care what they think anymore. They are ghosts to me." I truly believed that. I believed I had completely moved on. But a few months later, a ghost reached out and showed me that Caleb's betrayal was far darker than I had ever imagined. I was now an attending physician, making a fantastic salary, settling into a beautiful home with Sarah. My life was bulletproof. Then, I got an unexpected message on LinkedIn from a woman named Tessa. Tessa had worked in the administrative credentialing office at my old medical school in Richmond. She had since moved to a hospital network in DC and saw my name on a conference roster. We agreed to meet for coffee. I thought it was just going to be professional networking. We chatted about hospital politics for a bit, but then Tessa leaned forward, her expression turning serious and slightly uncomfortable. "Dr. Brennan, Nathan, there's actually a specific reason I wanted to reach out. Something happened years ago at the admin office, and it never sat right with me. I felt like you needed to know." I put my coffee down. "Okay, I'm listening." Tessa took a breath. "During your leave of absence, when you were taking care of your uncle, we received several bizarre phone calls regarding your file. The caller claimed to be a lawyer hired by a concerned family member." My stomach dropped. "A lawyer?" "He sounded aggressive, demanding to know the exact details of your leave. He tried to claim that you were suffering from severe mental instability and addiction, and that you were a danger to patients. He was explicitly trying to get the university to revoke your admission and permanently flag your medical license file." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands gripped the edge of the table. Did he give a name? He gave a fake firm name, but he slipped up during one of the calls. He got angry when I refused to release confidential records without your consent. He yelled, "I'm his brother. I have a right to know if he's a junkie." Tessa looked at me with deep sympathy. I recognized the voice from a previous call where he had just asked for basic enrollment verification. It was your brother, Nathan. He was actively trying to sabotage your medical career. He wanted you expelled. Couldn't breathe. The air in the coffee shop felt suffocating. It was one thing to lie to my parents to save his own ego. It was one thing to manipulate them into cutting me off so he could secure his inheritance and their undivided attention. But this was premeditated, malicious sabotage. Caleb knew I was still in medical school. He knew I hadn't failed. And because the reality of my success threatened his fragile ego, he tried to systematically destroy my professional life behind my back. He tried to ruin my future, my ability to earn a living, my dream. I thanked Tessa. I walked out to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Any lingering shred of pity or sibling connection I had left for Caleb completely vaporized in that car. He wasn't just a flawed brother. He was a monster, I made a silent vow right there. I would never seek him out. I would never go back to Durham. But if the universe ever put Caleb Brennan in my path again, I would not show him an ounce of mercy. I just never expected the universe to deliver him directly to my emergency room on a bloody stretcher. Which brings us back to that Tuesday night. The trauma bay doors flew open, hitting the magnetic stops with a loud bang. Paramedics rushed the gurney in, shouting vitals over the noise. Male, late 30s, unrestrained driver, high-speed collision with a concrete barrier. Suspected heavy alcohol involvement. BP is dropping, 80/50. Heart rate 130. We have a rigid abdomen. Suspected internal bleeding. I snapped my gloves on, my mind immediately shifting into trauma mode. All right, transfer him on my count. 1, 2, 3, move. We shifted the bloody, broken body onto the hospital bed. A nurse tossed me the clipboard with the ID they pulled from his wallet. I glanced down. Patient. Caleb Brennan. Time stopped. I looked up from the clipboard and stared at the face of the man on the table. It was covered in blood, swollen from the airbag impact, a jagged laceration running across his forehead. But I knew that face. I knew the shape of his jaw. I knew the coward inside that skull. It was Caleb, the man who destroyed my family, the man who tried to destroy my career. He was lying on my table, bleeding to death from a drunk driving crash, entirely dependent on my hands to survive. The irony was so thick it tasted like copper in my mouth. I had the power of a god in that room. All I had to do was hesitate. All I had to do was order the wrong fluid, delay the blood transfusion by 5 minutes, or misread the ultrasound. He would bleed out and nobody would ever question it. It would just be another tragic car crash. My heart pounded against my ribs. A dark, vengeful voice in the back of my mind screamed, "Let him go. Let the trash take itself out." But then I felt the heavy stethoscope against my neck. I remembered Dr. Carter. I remembered the oath I took. I was not a murderer. I was not Caleb. I was a professional, and I was vastly superior to the pathetic man bleeding on my table. I pushed the anger down into a tight little box and locked it. My voice rang out, cold, clear, and commanding. I need 2 large-bore IVs. Push a liter of saline wide open. Call the blood bank. Get the massive transfusion protocol started. Uncross-matched O negative now. Get the portable ultrasound. I need to check his abdomen for free fluid. Call Dr. Lincoln in surgery. Tell him we have a level 1 trauma prepping for the OR. My team moved like lightning. I stepped up to Caleb, grabbed the ultrasound probe, and pressed it against his bruised stomach. Dark fluid filled the screen. His spleen was ruptured. He was bleeding to death internally. "He's got a massive splenic bleed," I announced. "We need to intubate him to protect his airway before we roll him to surgery. Push the paralytic and the sedative. Hand me the laryngoscope." I stood at the head of the bed, tilted Caleb's chin back, and slipped the metal blade into his throat. I looked down into his vocal cords, the same vocal cords that had spun the lies that ruined my life, and I slid the breathing tube perfectly into place. I saved his life. I stabilized the man who tried to ruin mine, and I did it with a flawless mechanical precision. As the nurses prepped him to roll up to the surgical suite, one of the intake coordinators stepped into the room. "Dr. Brennan," she said, looking at her tablet. "The patient's family was contacted by the police. They just arrived. They're in the waiting area." I stepped back from the gurney, pulling my bloody gloves off and tossing them into the biohazard bin. "Tell surgery he's on the way," I instructed the charge nurse. "I'll handle the family update." I walked over to the scrub sink in the corner of the trauma bay. I turned the water on scalding hot. I grabbed the rough antibacterial soap and scrubbed the blood off my hands. Caleb's blood. The water ran pink down the stainless steel drain. I looked up at myself in the mirror above the sink. My eyes were dark, my jaw set tight. I wasn't the scared, rejected kid standing on the sidewalk holding a returned envelope anymore. I was a grown man. I was the chief attending of an emergency department. I held all the cards now. I dried my hands, straightened my white coat, and made sure my badge, Dr. Nathan Brennan, was perfectly visible on my chest. I walked out of the trauma bay and headed toward the family waiting area. It was separated by a large glass partition. As I approached, I could see them through the glass, pacing nervously. Robert looked older, his shoulders hunched. Eleanor was wringing her hands, her face pale with terror, and standing slightly behind them, looking grim, was Uncle Matthew. Apparently, they had dragged him along for support. I took a deep breath, savoring the absolute power of this moment. I pushed the heavy glass doors open and stepped into the room. That brings us back to the moment I described at the very beginning. The moment my mother locked eyes with me. The moment the color completely drained from her face as she saw the white coat, the stethoscope, the badge. She grabbed my father's arm, her nails digging into his jacket. "Tell me that's not him," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of terror and cognitive dissonance. My father stared at me, his mouth hung open. "But we were told he dropped out. We were told." Uncle Matthew looked at my badge, a slow, knowing realization washing over his face. He looked at my parents, then back at me. So that was all a lie. I didn't smile. I didn't show an ounce of emotion. I stood there, a towering wall of professional authority, looking down at the two people who had thrown me away like garbage. "Mr. and Mrs. Brennan?" I said, my voice projecting across the room, completely devoid of any familial warmth. "I am Dr. Nathan Brennan, the attending physician in charge of this emergency department. I am here to give you a medical update on your son." My father took a shaky step forward, his hand reaching out. "Nathan, my God, Nathan. You're a doctor? Here?" Caleb said. "Caleb told us." "I strongly suggest you lower your hand, sir," I interrupted, my tone cutting through the air like a scalpel. "I am not here for a family reunion. I am here to inform you that your son was brought in highly intoxicated after crashing his car. He has suffered a ruptured spleen and massive internal bleeding. I personally intubated him and stabilized his hemodynamics. He is currently being moved to an operating room where a surgical team will attempt to save his life." My mother let out a loud sob, covering her face. Whether she was crying for Caleb's condition or crying because her entire reality had just been violently shattered, I didn't care. He's going to live?" my father asked, his voice cracking. He looked small. For the first time in his life, Robert Brennan looked pathetic. "He is stable for now, no thanks to his own reckless choices," I replied clinically. "I have transferred his care to Dr. Lincoln, the head of trauma surgery. You can wait here for further updates." I turned on my heel, ready to walk away. I was going to leave them drowning in their own shock. But before the door closed, my father called out, a desperate plea trying to claw back 10 years of mistakes in a single second. "Nathan, wait, please. We didn't know. We have to talk." I stopped. I didn't turn around right away. I let the silence hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted them to feel the weight of this room. I wanted them to realize that they were standing in my castle, and they had absolutely no power here. I slowly turned my head, looking at them over my shoulder. "We will talk," I said softly, the promise sounding more like a threat. "Tomorrow morning, when your golden boy wakes up. I want him awake to hear exactly what I have to say to all of you." I walked out, leaving them trapped in the waiting room with nothing but the terrifying realization that their 10-year lie had just violently collided with the truth. And the truth was wearing a white coat. I did not sleep that night. I stayed in my office, drinking terrible break-room coffee, reviewing patient charts, and watching the sun slowly rise over the Washington skyline. The hospital was waking up, transitioning from the chaotic night shift to the steady hum of the morning routine. I changed into a fresh set of scrubs, put on a clean white coat, and clipped my badge to the lapel. It was time. I walked down the quiet corridor of the surgical recovery wing. Dr. Lincoln had texted me an hour earlier. Caleb had made it through the surgery. They removed his ruptured spleen, stopped the internal bleeding, and took him off the ventilator. He was awake, breathing on his own, and heavily medicated. I pushed the door open. The room smelled of iodine and sterile linens. Caleb was lying in the center of the bed, and 4 lines snaking into his arm, a heart monitor steadily beeping next to his head. He looked terrible. His skin was pasty and gray, his face heavily bruised from the airbag, and the arrogant spark that usually danced in his eyes was completely gone. He slowly turned his head as I walked in. I stopped at the foot of his bed, picking up his chart from the plastic bin. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, reading the surgical notes, letting the silence stretch out until it became agonizing. Caleb blinked, his eyes focusing on my face. Then they dropped to the embroidered letters on my coat. Dr. Nathan Brennan, Chief Attending. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the information. I watched 10 years of lies, manipulation, and carefully constructed deceit crash down on him all at once. His breath hitched. He tried to push himself up, but a sharp grimace of pain washed over his face, and he fell back against the pillows. "Nathan," he croaked, his throat dry from the breathing tube. He tried to force a weak, pathetic smile. The same fake smile he used to charm his way out of trouble when we were kids. "Little brother, you're here." I kept my eyes on the chart. "Your blood pressure is stabilizing. Your hemoglobin is still a bit low, but the transfusion did its job. You are incredibly lucky you didn't bleed out on the highway." "Nate, come on," Caleb rasped, lifting a trembling hand. "They told me you were the doctor who brought me in. You saved my life. I knew you could do it. I always believed in you, man." The sheer audacity of the lie almost made me laugh. He was backed into a corner, completely exposed, and his survival instinct was to just keep lying. I dropped the chart back into the bin with a loud clack. I stepped up to the side of his bed and looked down at him. "I am not your brother," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying the weight of an absolute verdict. "I am the attending physician who was legally obligated to stabilize a drunk driver. That is where our relationship begins, and that is exactly where it ends." Caleb's fake smile vanished. A flash of genuine fear crossed his eyes. "Nate, you have to listen to me. Mom and Dad, they misunderstood everything back then. I tried to tell them, but they just wouldn't listen to reason. I tried to defend you." I leaned in closer. "I know about the phone calls, Caleb. I know about the fake lawyer you hired to call my medical school. I know you tried to have my medical license revoked." The color completely drained from his already pale face. The heart monitor beside him picked up its pace, the beeps coming faster and faster. He opened his mouth to speak, to form another lie, another excuse, but nothing came out. He was completely paralyzed by the truth. "You don't have any power here," I told him, standing back up and straightening my coat. "You are nothing but a patient in bed for. Keep your heart rate down. You have a long recovery ahead of you." I turned my back on him and walked out of the room. I didn't look back. I had another appointment to keep. I walked down to the second-floor conference room. It was a small, windowless space we usually used for delivering bad news to grieving families. Today, it felt perfectly appropriate. I had asked Uncle Matthew to bring Robert and Eleanor there at 8 o'clock sharp. When I opened the door, they were already sitting at the long wooden table. My mother was clutching a crumpled tissue, her eyes red and swollen. My father sat stiffly, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Uncle Matthew sat at the far end, holding a thick manila folder in his lap. As soon as I walked in, my father practically leaped out of his chair. He took a step toward me, his arms opening wide. "Nathan," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "My son. My boy." I sidestepped him completely, walking around the table to stand opposite them. "Sit down, Mr. Brennan." My father froze. His arms slowly dropped to his sides. He looked at me as if I had just slapped him across the face. "Mr. Brennan? Nathan, please. It's Dad." "Sit down," I repeated, the command echoing sharply off the bare walls. He swallowed hard and slowly sank back into his chair. My mother let out a small, trembling sob. I looked at the three of them. Uncle Matthew gave me a firm nod of solidarity. He had waited 10 years for this day just as much as I had. "I brought you here to give you an update on your son," I started, keeping my posture rigid and my tone entirely clinical. "Caleb is awake. The surgery was successful. He will be in the hospital for at least another week to monitor for infection, but he is going to survive." My mother exhaled a loud breath of relief, covering her face with her hands. "Thank God. Thank God. Now that the medical update is out of the way," I said, placing my hands flat on the table, "we are going to address the reality of why we are sitting in this room." My father leaned forward, eager to seize control of the narrative. "Nathan, we are so incredibly proud of you. We had no idea. We were deceived. Caleb told us such horrible things, and we were just so worried about you. We wanted to reach out, but we didn't know where you were." "Stop." I cut him off sharply. I looked at Uncle Matthew. He slid the thick manila folder across the table toward me. I opened it. "You were not deceived," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the rage burning in my chest. "You were willing participants. You chose to be blind because it was easier than facing the truth." I pulled out the first stack of papers and dropped them directly in front of my father. "These are the certified copies of my medical school transcripts. Attached to them is the formal approval letter for my leave of absence to care for Uncle Matthew. These are the exact same documents I mailed to your house 10 years ago." My father stared at the papers. "Nathan, we never saw these." "You never saw them because you didn't want to see them," I countered. I reached into the folder and pulled out a large, heavy priority mail envelope. The edges were worn, but the thick black Sharpie ink on the front was still perfectly clear. I tossed it onto the center of the table. My mother stared at it. She recognized her own handwriting immediately. "Return to sender." "You didn't even open it," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You condemned me without a trial. You believed the son who had a history of lying over the son who had never given you a single reason to doubt him. You blocked my phone number. You blocked my email. You completely erased me." "We were scared," my mother cried out, reaching across the table. "Caleb said you were having a breakdown. He said you were unstable and dangerous." I pulled out another document. It was a printed transcript of an email from Tessa, detailing the phone logs. I slid it over the envelope. "Caleb didn't just lie to you to cover his own insecurities," I explained, watching their eyes scan the text. "He actively tried to destroy my career. He hired someone to call my university, posing as a lawyer, demanding they revoke my admission. He tried to put a permanent psychiatric flag on my medical license. He wanted me to fail so desperately that he tried to orchestrate it himself." The room went completely silent. My father picked up the email printout. His hands were shaking violently. He read the words, and I watched the last remaining pillar of his pride crumble into dust. He had spent his entire life bragging to his friends about his perfect, charismatic son Caleb, while treating his youngest son like an inconvenience. Now, he was holding undeniable proof that his golden boy was a malicious, vindictive sociopath. "My God," my father whispered, the paper fluttering in his trembling grip. "What has he done?" "The question isn't what he has done," I corrected him. "The question is what you have done. You enabled him. You funded his lifestyle. You paid off his debts. You dipped into my college fund to buy him cars, and you rewarded his lies with your undivided loyalty. You built the monster that is currently lying in a hospital bed upstairs." My mother broke down completely. She reached out, trying to grab my hand. "Nathan, please. We are so sorry. We will make this right. We will pay you back. We want to be a family again. We want to know you. We want to be in your life." I pulled my hand back, stepping away from the table. I felt a profound, overwhelming sense of liberation wash over me. The heavy chains of my childhood, the desperate need for their approval, simply evaporated. "There is nothing to make right," I said calmly. "You cannot pay back 10 years of absence. You weren't there when I graduated. You weren't there when I married a brilliant, beautiful woman. You didn't lose me the night of that phone call. You threw me away, every single day, for 3,650 days." "Son, please," my father begged, tears finally spilling over his eyelids. "Don't do this. He's your brother. We are your parents." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. I was treating this relationship like a funeral, and the casket was finally closing. I saved his life because I am a physician, and it is my job. But outside of those hospital doors, we share nothing. Do not call my office. Do not look for my home. You made your choice 10 years ago. Now you have to live with the son you chose. I turned around, walked out the door, and closed it firmly behind me. I didn't look back at the sound of my mother wailing. The storm was finally over. A year passed. Life has a funny way of balancing the scales when you finally stop trying to force the universe to do it for you. I didn't need to enact some grand, convoluted revenge plot against Caleb or my parents. They were perfectly capable of destroying their own lives without any help from me. Uncle Matthew called me on a Sunday afternoon while I was grilling in the backyard. We still talked every week. He had become the father figure I always needed, the only connection to my past that I actively maintained. He sat on his porch in North Carolina, sipping iced tea, and gave me the update on the Brennan family fallout. It was brutal. When Caleb recovered from his injuries, the reality of his drunk driving crash caught up with him. He was fired from his corporate job due to the scandal and the extended absence. Without his salary, his carefully constructed house of cards collapsed. His wife, who had been fed up with his lying and financial infidelity for years, finally filed for divorce. She didn't hold back. It became a vicious public custody battle over their 2 kids. Caleb needed a high-priced lawyer to keep himself out of jail for the DUI and to fight the divorce settlement. And just like always, he ran crying to Robert and Eleanor. My parents, crippled by the guilt of realizing what they had created, enabled him one last time. They drained their retirement savings. They sold their second car. They even had to take a massive loan against the house, completely liquidating what would have been Caleb's future inheritance, just to pay his legal fees. Now, Caleb was living in their guest bedroom. He was broke, bitter, and unemployed. My parents were spending their golden years trapped in a house with an angry, resentful man they could no longer control, drowning in debt, and fully aware that they had sacrificed their only successful child to protect him. It was a prison of their own making. I listened to Matthew tell the story, and I didn't feel a surge of vindictive joy. I just felt a quiet, profound sense of closure. Karma didn't miss. My own life was moving in the exact opposite direction. 6 months after the incident in the ER, the hospital board offered me a massive promotion. I was named the head of emergency medicine. I had my own office, a dedicated team of residents, and the respect of every surgeon in the building. But the real victory wasn't the title or the paycheck. The real victory was walking into my house every evening. Sarah and I had just welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby girl named Maya. Coming home after a grueling 12-hour shift, smelling the dinner Sarah was cooking, and holding my daughter against my chest was a level of peace I never thought I would achieve. We asked Uncle Matthew to be Maya's godfather, and he cried when we told him. We had built our own family, a family based on mutual respect, honesty, and unconditional support. A few weeks after Maya was born, a delivery truck pulled up to our driveway. The driver handed me a medium-sized cardboard box. I didn't recognize the return address at first. It was a boutique baby store in North Carolina. I brought it inside and set it on the kitchen island. Sarah walked over holding Maya. "Who is it from?" she asked. I opened the flap. Inside was an expensive, hand-knitted baby blanket, a stuffed bear, and a pristine white envelope. I pulled the envelope out and opened it. It was a card from my mother. The handwriting was shaky, different from the bold strokes she used 10 years ago. The message was long, desperate, and stained with tears. She wrote about how much she missed me. She wrote about how empty the house felt. She begged for a second chance. She pleaded for just one photograph of her new granddaughter. She said she was ready to be a real mother now. I stood there, staring at the cursive letters. A decade ago, a letter like this would have broken me. I would have dropped everything, driven down to Durham, and desperately tried to piece the shattered glass back together. But I wasn't that broken kid anymore. I was a father now. My job was to protect my daughter from toxic people, even if those people shared my DNA. I wasn't going to let the chaos, the manipulation, and the conditional love of the Brennan family infect my home. I folded the card and put it back in the envelope. I placed the envelope, the bear, and the blanket back into the cardboard box and taped it shut. I walked over to the junk drawer in the kitchen and pulled out a thick, black Sharpie. I looked at the box, feeling the warm sunshine streaming through the kitchen window. I heard Sarah humming a lullaby to Maya in the living room. I had everything I ever wanted. I uncapped the marker and wrote 3 large, bold words across the top of the box. Return to sender. I carried the box out to my porch and left it for the mail carrier. I walked back inside, locked the door, and went to hold my daughter. Looking back on that 10-year journey, the greatest lesson I learned was about the true definition of family. We are conditioned by society to believe that blood is an unbreakable bond. We are told that we have to forgive our parents and our siblings simply because we share a last name. But blood does not equal loyalty. DNA does not give someone a free pass to abuse you, manipulate you, or erase your existence to serve their own ego. Love without accountability is just a hostage situation. If you are dealing with people who constantly demand your energy but refuse to acknowledge your worth, you have to stop going to a dry well expecting to find water. You do not have to beg anyone to believe the truth. The truth stands on its own. Your only responsibility is to build a life so incredibly solid, so undeniably successful, that their lies simply shatter the moment they hit your reality. I didn't win by screaming at my father. I didn't win by throwing punches at Caleb. I won by walking away, becoming the man I knew I could be, and letting them drown in the consequences of their own toxic choices. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. It wasn't an easy journey to recount, but laying it all out like this reminds me of exactly how far I've come. I hope this resonated with you in some way. I know family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, and walking away is often the hardest choice a person can make. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to cut ties to save your own sanity? Let me know your experiences in the comments below. And for those of you who stayed with me through every twist, every heartbreak, and every victory right to this very second, you are the real ones. Please drop the letter W in the comments down below. That stands for winner. That is our secret code for the 1% Club, the amazing group of people who have the attention span and the empathy to watch a story all the way to the end. I read every single one of those comments, and it means the world to me. If you want to hear more stories about real life, real struggles, and taking back your power, make sure you hit that like button and follow the channel. I'll see you in the next one. Stay strong.